It's my pleasure today to host a conversation with a PhD doctoral student, Nathan Samayo from Princeton Theological Seminary, who is dissertating within the Religion and Society Committee at Princeton Seminary. Nate and I met up recently in Berkeley, on the other side of the coast where we normally have our home at Princeton, at the APARRI conference, the Asian Pacific American Religions Research Initiative, where I learned about his research trip to Guam. So, Nate, where are you right now?
Yeah, David, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. So right now, I'm currently in Guam, which is the indigenous name for Guam. And I'm in the village of Chao, which is in the kind of smack center of the island. So yeah, I've been here since last Sunday, so that's about 10 days so far. And I feel like I'm fully acclimated here and kind of getting things going.
That's great. That's great. Maybe I want to hear more about what brings you, what what your research project is that brings you to Guam. But maybe before that, you can just help our audience understand a little bit of your background. Where did you grow up?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a very personal project. And, right now, where I'm at now, summer 2024, I'm not necessarily calling this a research project yet. This is kind of just dipping my toes in the water. You know what I mean? But also I have a lot of family out here. So beyond the kind of research need that, I'm trying to consider while I'm here. It's also just a rekindling of my family who I haven't seen specifically in 8 years.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, in terms of where this kind of project started, I guess I'll start with my end goal with the PhD, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And my dissertation is going to be looking at indigenous religion and ecological ethics in the Pacific. So I start specifically in the post-World War II era and into the Cold War, where specifically with the Marshall Islands nuclear test that happened starting 1946 to 1958. And part of my question really looks at indigenous environmental ethics that can, provide some kind of orientation, some kind of like ethics towards environmental stewardship, especially in this era where the Pacific is, being occupied by the U.S. military, especially between East Asian and U.S. affairs, and the ways in which it's been the site for military infrastructure development to develop kind of the U.S. military muscle against East Asia. And then also how it's just been, you can really see the impact of climate change here in the Pacific, especially with one of the islands, Kiribati, that's being projected to sink, I think, by 2045. And so a lot of these questions around military occupation, technological and scientific advancement, and climate change, really this kind of umbrella that I'm looking at and the ways in which indigenous religions and environmental ethics can help curb that. So that was a lot, but that's kind of my end goal and what I'll be writing my dissertation on. But in terms of this being a very personal project, I don't know if this is where maybe I should just share a little bit about my story,
Yeah, please do.
about how I
Please
got
do.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I was born in Guam. I was the youngest out of five. And so I was 1 year old when my family left Guam. My dad was already 45 and my mom was 37. So they've lived their life on the island. And this gets a little personal, but I think the story is, you know, it's out there more. My family's comfortable talking about it. So this is an intimate story, but basically what happened was in the 1990s, the island became very hyper militarized. And so, 1/3 of the island fell under US military jurisdiction. And it became one of the main kind of military bases and sites for the US within the Pacific. And because of that, when the US military came into Guam and hyper-militarized in the 1990s, a lot of the local Chamorro people, so the Chamorros are the indigenous people of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands, they got a lot of them lost their jobs, so they got pushed either into working for the military or getting enlisted. So Guam is actually has the highest enlistment rate per capita in the United States, which is a fact that not a lot of people know because Guam is kind of a lot of people don't know about the context of Guam within the kind of U.S. Body politic, but it actually has the highest enlistment rate per capita in the U.S. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But yeah, a lot of locals lost their jobs, and so a lot of people got pushed into the military. A lot of them got pushed into the tourism industry, and a lot of people got into selling kek, which is the name for crystal meth in Guam. And drugs became a big issue in Guam as a result of U.S. military occupation. And my dad's sister, this is where it gets a little personal and trigger warning, but my dad's sister got into a bad drug affair because I believe the someone who she was dating, and she got burned alive in a bad drug deal. Uh,
Oh my
and my
goodness.
dad was a fire, yeah, and my dad was a firefighter at the time.
Oh wow.
And so, when they got called to the scene, they actually told my dad not to come because, when some of his, coworkers, his co-firefighters showed up, they saw that it was my dad's last name, and so they told him not to come because they knew that that was his sister.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, that traumatized my family and made us leave Guam. So we were one of the first people in my immediate family. So I have a huge family, and my mom is 1 out of 41, or excuse me, she's 1 out of 13 kids, but I have 41 first cousins just on my mom's side. And then I'm still counting how many cousins I have on my dad's side. So there's that. But out of my family, we were, I believe, the second immediate family to leave the island, and we relocated to Tacoma, Washington. So that was after I turned 1 year old, and then I grew up most of my life in the States, in Tacoma. So there's that context of what happened in Guam. I'm happy to keep going more, but I don't know if that's something that
Yeah,
do some, or
well,
what do you think?
yeah, well, Nate, first is for me, um, at the horror and the shock and
Mhm.
dismay of learning of this tragedy in your family's history. Thank you for entrusting that sensitive part of your family's story with our podcast, and our thoughts and prayers for the loved one lost, and for your willingness to share that. But it also helps to frame how deeply personal this quote unquote research
Sure.
project is. And I think one of the themes or commitments of the Center for Asian American Christianity is to understand how the study of religion and Christianity in particular sits at the intersection of our lived experience. And you so poignantly
Mhm.
described that intersection of research and lived experience. So I just want to acknowledge and demonstrate my respect and appreciation for that part of your very personal narrative. You also gave us a tremendous amount of relevant details and facts about Guam being the highest per capita military enlistment. And I just want to clarify for our audience, the official status of Guam is a U.S. territory, correct? So it's part of the United States, but without representation as a formal state entity, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a U.S. The technical name is the unincorporated territory
Okay.
within the United States, and basically restricted right as quote unquote U.S. citizens. But they also don't have any voting delegation in Congress or for president. They don't have any electoral votes when it comes to the presidential election. So, I mean, it's a colony. I mean, that's what, the technical name under international law is an unincorporated territory, but it's a colony of the United States,
Right.
which a lot of people don't wrestle that we have current colonies, including Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Guam within the U.S. body politic.
And even I'm not going to pursue this too much because as we said in the pre conversation, we're not going to give a historical overview and political framing of Guam, which we could do and would be very interesting. Guam pays taxes to the federal government, but does not have representation. Taxation without representation. Where have we heard this before?
Exactly, right? It's a historical phenomena that is currently moving within the island of Guam. And so when we even talk about, when we theorize decolonization, I mean, these are very much lived realities in our contemporary context. And so that's one of the main things that I'm pushing within my scholarship.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So, maybe let's now pivot more to this trip to Guam and say more about how your intellectual narrative that brought you to Guam today, as well as how you've been framing your research on land and military and environmental ethics. This sounds like a fascinating intersection of three different elements. Could you maybe share with our audience some of the intellectual journey that brought you here?
Sure, yeah, thank you for that. And part of it's a ministry journey, right? Which I kind of miss being in ministry. I mean, I was doing it during my 3 years at Harvard. But yeah, in terms of where this came from, so I grew up in Tacoma, Washington for 18 years. I graduated from high school in Washington State. And then I went to college, had a whole journey there. I was at Seattle Pacific University. And my 3rd year, I took a required Christian theology class. I'll never forget it. And in that class, it's a required class. I was studying sociology and mathematics, like Christianity was in my purview. I also grew up Catholic, but we can go into that whole thing another time. Uh, so I took this class and then we read, I'm going to give you all the really quick version. Kelly Brown Douglas's book, Black Bodies and the Justice of God, Stand Your Ground. And that book really showed me that there's an intersection between social justice and Christian faith. So, and I didn't know that existed because I didn't grow up in church. I mean, I grew up, culturally Catholic. So we went to turn up at the church. We had DJs and alcohol and all that kind of stuff. I did confirmation, Holy Communion. I did all that within the Catholic tradition, but I didn't know anything about ministry. And so I read that book, discovered that there's an intersection that exists between social justice and Christian faith. And then I interned at a very well-known multicultural church in Seattle called Quest Church. And it's a church it was led first by Eugene Cho, and then is now led by Reverend Gail Bantum, who is one of my pastoral mentors who I've had for a while, and I'm very grateful to her. And her husband, Dr. Brian Bantum, was one of my professors at Seattle Pacific University, and both of them really, you know, encouraged me to pursue ministry. And so that's what happened because I didn't grow up as a church kid. Um, so I actually went to seminary to become a pastor. A PhD was not in my purview at all, at all. And then, I went to Harvard Divinity School, right? Because that's where people go for ministry. No, no,
Joke. That's a joke. That's a joke.
I mean, that's a joke. I love my Harvard folks. Uh, I mean, different schools.
I have lovely colleagues and very good friends that I highly respect at Harvard Divinity School. All of yes.
Yeah, well, I think Harvard does a great job of, intellectual rigor. And if you are interested in ministry, really learning how to have multi-faith dialogue. I mean, I think that's one of the skills at Harvard Divinity School. So I had a fantastic time there. I'll never give it up. But while I was at Harvard, I had a huge reckoning with my faith. I came in very excited about evangelical Christian ministry because, I was new to it. I love the smoke light and the guitars and the bass and Jordans and, $600 pair of pants. I loved all of that, right? When I started at Harvard, I loved it. Ripped jeans, skinny, all that. That was me. And then, you know, I got introduced to theory. I mean, as cliche as it sounds, I never read Foucault, right? I never read Derrida. I read all these kind of continental philosophers and I got really excited, right? And so I started doing that. And then one of the most influential professors in my life, Dr. Mayra Rivera, very indebted to her for introducing me to post-colonial and decolonial scholarship my 2nd year at Harvard Divinity School. And as I was looking through, these decolonial and post-colonial thinkers, I started shifting towards religious studies, which we can have that conversation maybe another time about that shift. But I started shifting to religious studies and then decolonial and post-colonial theory. And as I read a lot of, folks within the African and African diaspora context, um, the Indian subcontinent, Latin American kind of decolonial and post-colonial work, I started asking where the Pacific was within conversation, specifically because they had their own huge land back and decolonial movement also within the 1960s post-colonial turn. And I started wondering why the Pacific, as a site of scientific experimentation, aka the nuclear testings in the Marshall Islands, occupation of the Kingdom of Hawaii, Guam, specifically starting, Spanish colonization in 1565. I started just wondering where the Pacific was in all of this, especially because it had a very specific role within US and East Asian geopolitics. And so that was my second year at Harvard Divinity School. And then my third year, I just kind of jumped right in to ask the question about religion within the Pacific, uh, decolonial movement, the politics of self-determination and land sovereignty. And I wrote a master's thesis on what the self-determination and land back movement looked like in Guam. I was very new to the conversation, so I was not an expert. I don't want anyone kind of asking me these what's going on in the context of Guam. I'm still learning. But then I discovered the Patela Texan movement, which I'm happy to talk a little bit more about. And just started, learning a lot more about indigenous spirituality, indigenous cosmology in the Pacific, and how it's naturally attuned towards decolonization and liberation for Pacific Islanders. And I applied to Princeton Theological Seminary in the Religion and Society PhD program to continue pursuing this research. So that's where I'm at now at PCS. And again, that was a lot. So feel free to
Oh, I think that was a beautifully coherent intellectual narrative.
Oh no.
That was tremendous, Nate. I want to continue to bounce between the personal and the lived with the sort of academic research questions you have. So you mentioned how this is the first time back to see family in about 8 years, and you've been on the island for more than a week now. What did it feel like to land? I think 10 days ago you said, like, tell me existentially, what was that like to return back to the land of your birth that you haven't seen in quite some time?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll say that this experience alongside the first experience I had when I came to Guam back in 2016.
Yeah.
Which was the first time, this was 8 years ago. It was my first time to the island of Guam, since I left when I was 1 year old. And that was a tough experience because the reason why my dad and I went to Guam in the summer of 2016 was because my mom died that year. So February of 2016, my mom passed away unexpectedly. So my mom died 2016, and then my grandma on my dad's side died also a couple months after in June. And so it was really, it was a big deal for my dad to go back to Guam as well, so that we can go to my grandma's funeral and then also reconnect with my mom's side of the family. So, right when this was back in 2016, right after my dad and I stepped off the airport, I mean, we went straight to church with my dad's side of the family. I met all this family who we know, but I haven't seen since, in all those years. And it just felt, like I came back home. I mean, existentially, it didn't feel like an unfamiliar place. I mean, I felt connected to Guam culturally because my family is very, some folks fresh off the boat. But my family, I mean, you and I can have a conversation. I wouldn't interpret.
Yeah. No, I
My
got you.
family very fresh off the boat, very old school Chamorro, like very respect of the elders, down to taking your shoes off when you enter the house, like all that stuff, right? And so culturally it wasn't unfamiliar. Geographically, being back in Guam, which is a tropical island, I mean, it just kind of all felt like it came together. I saw my mom's side of the family and my dad's side of the family, and so it just felt like a rekindling of our, familial spirit. So that's the context of 2016. I also did not even know what, colonization meant. It was my first year of college, right? So, I was just in, the high spirits of going to college. Didn't even know anything about the even political context of Guam.
Mm-hmm.
8 years later, 2024, right? Uh, we just came from the APARRI conference, which I just want to give a shout out to APARRI. It's one of my favorite intellectual and community bodies. If you are part of the AAPI diaspora, please check out APARRI. But we came fresh from APARRI with, the conversations of APARRI is around decolonization, Asian American Pacific Islander heritage and culture, and that's the spirit that I came from direct when we left San Francisco and I came to Guam. Now coming back, being very antagonistic about the US empire, uh it's as much as so two things I want to mention. A, I love my family. I love seeing my family. I love this organization that I'm volunteering for, Micronesian Climate Change Alliance. And my family is very loving, very respectful, very caring. We went out to eat, we laughed, we did all that. Micronesian Climate Change Alliance is an amazing organization, and they're doing a lot of great work for land back movement. I'm learning so much from them, from just having conversations and listening to conversations that they're having. And that's the beauty of being back here in Guam. The hard part is, man, I can just physically see the consequences of late stage capitalism. I mean, as meta as that sounds, you can just see how the US is flexing its muscle, its military muscle, uh, and all these relocation efforts for US military personnel from Okinawa to come to Guam starting December and moving on. I mean, there's so many construction developments that are just wiping out jungles so that they can house military personnel. I mean, you can see it just driving down the road. And so it's hard. It's really hard, especially knowing that I have a lot of family out here. Uh, I'm working for an amazing organization that is upfront and very, uh, they're strong advocates for land back movements, and they know what they're talking about, and they're in solidarity with other islands in the Pacific. And then, man, we just have conversations and we're just reminded that the US is just turning this into one big military base. I mean, that's the situation. And so it's hard. I mean, I'm a little bit more politically aware, and I think that's why the central dread is a lot more stressful. So I'll start with that.
Oh, existential dread as
Yeah.
an 8-year older self than your freshman college self, where you
That's
have been reading Foucault, Derrida, a liberation theology. That's a really uh, powerful existential journey. There's a couple themes I want to pick up and probe a little deeper, and I'd love to. So the nerd side of me wants to know more about your method for your dissertation, but I don't want to bore our audience. So maybe just touch on things like, are you doing oral history interviews? Is this an ethnographic component? You mentioned, I think at APARRI, and yes, a huge shout out to APARRI, an incredible community and intellectual community. But I remember you saying something like developing archives. So when I do Asian American theology, there's a dearth of Asian American ecclesial archives. This is kind of the reason I've pivoted to oral history interviews as even a more basic structure that's needed to do the research, right? Because archives themselves are repositories of knowledge with gatekeepers that have power to tell a story a certain way. Now, I don't want to get sidetracked on that. That's kind of just a little bookmark. What I want to pursue, though, is the consequences of late stage capitalism are evident everywhere. So walk us through that. Just give me vignettes here. You're driving along and there's a chain link fence with barbed wire, and then they're paving, a landing strip for a C-130 aircraft carrier or, large aircraft, painted out. And maybe to tee it up for you, I live 15 minutes north of Princeton near the airport, the very small Princeton airport, and they're building a Whole Foods. And the corner where this property lot exists used to be like green with trees. Yesterday we had this intense gust wind in Princeton, and it's all like red dirt. So there's just this red dirt cloud because there's no grass holding the dirt in place, and it's just like this storm of dirt because we raised all the vegetation off the land to make way for concrete and buildings and, delicious whole foods. So the movie image this conjured up was Avatar. and the power of construction equipment, massive machines lined up, just raising. And then it's like a week later, the topography has completely changed. I'm like, oh, I don't even recognize this space anymore because there's no more trees here. I can actually see for a mile straight now. Anyways, that's my version of what you were beginning to share conjured up. But could you give us some specific vignettes of the consequences of late stage capitalism?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And again, this kind of meta phrase, right? Late stage capitalism, who even knows what we're talking about when everybody has different definitions. But really this idea that like, man, gas here is $5.09. Like I buy this dang, I cook with a lot of oyster sauce because I like stir fry. This oyster sauce bottle I buy in the US, $3.49. Here it's $10. And I was like, yo, what? Like, I was debating if I should even buy this oyster sauce that I cook almost every week with to make stir fry. I mean, those are, very minute examples, but, late stage, the consequences of late stage capitalism have been dating back. I mean, there's this running joke that islanders like Spam, right? And part of the history of islanders liking Spam is that when the U.S. occupied Guam and depopulated the fish population here, I mean, a lot of locals had to be dependent on processing in order to eat. I mean, that's where the liking of Spam, Vienna sausage, pottage meat, like that's where that comes from. And we've made a kind of cultural joke around it. So I want to give some kind of vignette, also not historian yet. So two things I just wanted to claim. The first one, how do you say this? Kind of for folks, I want to encourage folks to listen to the second and third part of the podcast while I'll actually have started the internship and can give you a little bit more context about what I'm doing. So I just want to drop that in there. The second one is I'm not a historian. I don't say that to kind of belittle myself, but the fact that I'm coming here and I'm learning much more every day by being on the island. And so I want to hold that, with some confidence in that I'm still learning, but my family is part of this context. Part of the ethnographic anthropological project is to recognize that local communities are caught up in these larger global webs, right? These larger global flows. And Guam is no different from that. Anything. I feel like it's one of the most explicit contexts of U.S. imperialism in the 21st century. That being said, right, I mean, one of the movements I've been following is called Patehila Texan, and it emerged, I believe, 2016, 2017, and it was in response to this legal decision that was made in 2010, where it started in 2006, and then also in 2010, where the U.S. government said that they're going to relocate 8,600 Marine and 9,000 dependents from Okinawa to Guam as an effort to strengthen their military presence within the Pacific Rim. If you dig into it a little bit more, you'll also learn that U.S. military personnel in Okinawa actually correlated with higher rates of sexual assault crimes in Okinawa and also contaminated their water supply. And so these were coming out from Japanese newspaper headlines. And so I've been following this after some advocacy effort and resistance effort, I believe in regards to the kind of disastrous environmental impacts that what this huge relocation effort was going to make. In 2015, I believe they lowered down the number to about 5,000 military personnel, and I believe 1,000 to 2,000 dependents. And because of that, they are developing these large military infrastructure development, not only for housing, but also for things like artillery testing, um, being able to store petroleum and oil and other herbicides and pesticides in order to maintain these military infrastructure developments. And so I've been following this movement that's looking to combat these military infrastructure developments. And in regards to, uh, how I can see this in a very explicit, uh, what is a visual manner. I mean, I know people who are contracted with different US and I believe it also Japanese construction sites to build these military infrastructure developments. So they're wiping out jungles, specifically in the northern part of the island, which is home to one of the national wildlife refugee kind of areas on the island. And they're also developing more military infrastructure development in the never eat sour worm, the western side of the island in the village of Stumai, which I was passing by just the other day when I was heading down to the south of the island. And yeah, they're just wiping out the jungle and inputting these military infrastructure development. And I've been talking to people, who are contracted with these construction sites who are actively, engaging in these projects. And they're also Chamorro. So like, there are these
job.
that are very complicated, and I'll start with that, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for framing that. I also I think we're gonna have to post some of the links to either the books and scholars and movements and alliances you've mentioned in the show description. And we might need to do a link to a map. So just very quickly, position the island of Guam with relation to Hawaii, where we have one of the largest U.S. naval bases, given World War II, as well as Taiwan and then Japan and Okinawa. Like, can you just say briefly, if you could, like, are we equidistant? Is Guam equidistant from, let's say, Taiwan and Hawaii, or is it closer to Taiwan than Hawaii?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't say in terms of miles, but I will say to fly from Hawaii to Guam is 6 hours.
Got it.
To fly from Japan, Osaka specifically, to Guam is 3 hours and 45 minutes.
Yep.
So yeah.
The reason I ask is I want to situate everything that Nate has said within some of the larger geopolitics that I'm aware of. And especially as I talk with and interview Taiwanese American Christians, the island of Taiwan, the reason why the US is in a strategic alliance with Taiwan is because Taiwan is about 100 miles across from mainland China. And as things, as a new Cold War develops between US and China, a lot of the US militarization in the Pacific theater, Guam included, is in direct response to the perceived economic and military threat posed by China. And so Taiwan then becomes an interesting military ally as a floating aircraft carrier, some identify, and as well as with Okinawa. And so things like the Penghu Islands, which is in Taiwan Strait, is of extreme military significance and closely monitored, along with how the Philippines also offer a kind of natural corralling, or perhaps from the China perspective, constraint of their development. So the creation of artificial islands in the Pacific as military installations and commercial hubs is a known thing. And so everything that Nate is sharing can fit within this broader narrative of the US military's preparedness for a new Cold War with China. And I see you nodding, so maybe you want to jump in on this thread.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just talking to, uh, a policy advisor the other day. And, the reality is that based off what they said, the US currently has 21 aircraft carriers and China has 9. And the only reason why China hasn't striked yet was because the US can take them out. I mean, these are, I was going to say these are facts, but I think, when we have these conversations about social justice and liberation, sometimes we sight of the very tangible kind of contemporary politics that were just on the brink of a large scale war. I mean, I don't even know if I should get into all that right now, but sometimes I think that, we live in a delusion when we have these kind of social justice conversations and we're not paying attention to contemporary geopolitics. I mean, if you look at the context of Guam, this, one of the things I have an issue with when we talk about, you know, kind of surface level politics within Christian spaces, and peace talk and all of this is that, you know, when a large war breaks out soon, Chamorro people are here. Like they're going to take the brunt of. Yeah, so I just want to be mindful that as we talk about, within in Christian space when we have social justice and liberation discourse, that sometimes we can leave out the real material realities of people who live, man, in dead man's land between US and East Asian political and economic affairs. So that's kind of just what I wanted to mention.
I think that is spot on. That is a very timely word, um, given how Xi Jinping of China has stated that before 2027 he plans to act on reunifying China at all costs. This is I keep talking about this in my spheres of influence because no one else does, and I'm just thinking. So there's the matter itself, that a war to reunify China by taking Taiwan by force is near imminent. Those are the public statements of the leader of China. And he's not saying that for no reason. So then the US is now responding in like. This is what a Cold War is until it heats.
Yeah.
That's very serious. As an Asian American Christian theologian, this has direct implications for Asians in the US area, because history has proven that when foreign policy relationships between China and US go south, Asian Americans in the US pay for it. Japanese incarceration just being one example of how foreign Asian politics affect US citizens. And doing the 1924 exclusion event at the Japanese American National Museum on May 29th with Tim Sang and Tommy Joe just reinforced a lot of this history, that there were Japanese American citizens incarcerated during World War II simply because they looked like the enemy. I mean, so this is the kind of beginning to tie in how your project and trip and travel and internship and ministry in Guam is related very directly to these Asian American AAPI concerns. So I just wanted to make that explicit.
Yeah, thank you for that, David. That's very helpful kind of historical and contemporary context. And I'm being mindful of our time now. So there's kind of one point that I also want to drive to build off on what you're saying. And though I think the way you mentioned it was that the Cold War is starting to brew and there's gonna be direct implications for Asians within the American landscape. And I think one of the kind of points in which we should talk about an AAPI solidarity, which I have struggled with the whole AAPI kind of affinity, which we can get into later. But I think one of the points to mention is that, I mean, this isn't a Cold War for Pacific Islanders. I mean, this is happening now, right? And so it's not necessarily, this is, I'm going to get a lot of flack for this, but this is my issue with the ways that, the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor is talked about. I mean, it's always looked at as, and 100% for all the right reasons, there was anti-Asian racism and violence against people within the Asian American landscape. But also what happens that gets missed in that kind of historical meta-narrative, what happened to the Kanaka Maoli people in Hawaii, right?
Mhm.
Kind of just got dropped off of the, within in Hawaii. That kind of didn't make it largely within the histories that are talked about regarding Pearl Harbor. And so I say that to say that part of the AAPI solidarity for me has to be around, if there is a solidarity, right? How is it that Asians within the American landscape can also be very active in this moment,
Yep.
while recognizing that there will be direct implications for the continual buildup and occupation in Pacific Islands? I think I said that exactly how I wanted to say that, right? That we can recognize this as an urgent need to demilitarize, to deoccupy, so that it doesn't get worse for people within the AAPI diaspora. Given that Pacific Islanders right now are receiving the grunt of U.S. occupation and the continual threats made by East Asian hegemons. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't know what you have to say about
Yeah. So I think that was, I don't have much to add. I think that was beautifully stated.
okay.
What I hear you saying is this construct of, so there's Asian American, and then in recognition of the Asianness of Pacific Islanders, there is the broader and more inclusive and diverse term of Asian American Pacific Islander, AAPI. And what you're identifying is how this label is convenient for some, but leaves others out in the cold, such as the people of Guam, when the interests of the Asian American side of the AAPI solidarity are not understood as directly tied to the land claims of the PI people. In other words, this you're pointing out that what I said about war in China affecting Asians in America, yes, but it's already affecting the landed people of Guam. And
Absolutely.
the other Asian Americans need to know this and put their money where their mouth is with respect to this solidarity term, AAPI. That's what I heard you saying.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's spot on. So thank you for that. And I think folks trust us. So
Yeah.
whatever comes out of this conversation, I'm sure we can supplement it later.
Well, yeah. No, and I think, I mean, this is a direct light on the uneasiness of this term Asian American. When you have Japanese Americans, Korean Americans, Taiwanese Americans, Cantonese or Hong Kong Americans, Indian Americans, Filipino Americans, who in Asia don't naturally have a discourse with each other. Not only that, but I have Korean first generation parents or friends who won't buy Japanese cars because of Japanese imperialism. I have Taiwanese people who were colonized by the Japanese and either have an affinity or a disaffinity for the Japanese. So 100%. This is you are offering a very concrete argument that demonstrates how the PI part of the AAPI sits uneasily. And this is kind of an intramural Asian American conversation that is very legitimate.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think part of that is when we uncritically associate Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, I mean, we lose a whole host of history, Japanese imperialism in Guam, which is actually the reason why there's meta narrative people in Guam, the Chamorros in Guam, being indebted to the U.S. because after there's this meta narrative the U.S. liberated Guam from the Japanese after World War II. So like these kind of histories, become concealed when we create the kind of uncritical account for AAPI solidarity, especially, with just the general history of Asian settler colonialism in the Pacific. And I think I bring that up and people, get hesitant and stuff. And I'm just like, well, no, this is actually a very productive foundation that we can actually bring more history to light when we are able to. I mean, it's also, inter-Asian, right? What even bring Asia together other than the opposite? You know what I'm saying? So like, I think there's a lot more that we can do when we become a little bit more critical. And that's what my work, not only intellectually, but also within the community seeks to do, is to bring these histories to light so that we can be a little bit more rigorous around our solidarity. Wow.
Absolutely.
Well,
Look at yeah, you're speaking in a very inspired moment, and I feel that for my own self within the AAPI community, there needs to be recognition of the differences, good or bad, and then there
mhm,
needs to be accountability based on those recognition, and that's how relationships are built and then strengthened, right? So,
mhm,
or else we're in solidarity in name only. There's no real solidarity, and I think that's what you're trying to hold accountable. Hey, we have this thing called AAPI, but are we in it together? And this is what it takes to be in it together.
mhm.
And you're using your particular case of Guam. Before we wrap things up, you're at the beginning part of this internship of your trip to Guam. What are some of your hopes and dreams as you think about the next few weeks over the summer?
Absolutely. So a couple things. One is I want to talk to my family more intimately about our family's history, how we left, why we left Guam, connecting those kind of meta histories to our local kind of familial history. The second thing that I hope to do is just to meet activists and learn what they're doing. Um, and get the kind of underground history, but learn the history that's not being talked about hegemonically within kind of US media. So what's going on in Guam? That's one thing. The third thing is I really want to get to know the landscape, the seascape, and the culture here in Guam and how it's naturally oriented toward ecological resurgence and the kind of, I don't know, cultural beauty and what is it to be, what is it about Chamorro culture that is so life-giving? So in terms of research, hardcore research is kind of sitting, kind of in the back end right now or in the back seat. Um, in the sense of I'm not going to be taking ethnographic notes so critically and stuff like that. I'm really here just to understand the culture and kind of get a greater grasp on my family's history. And then also just to serve or to be in a position of service to a wonderful organization, Micronesian Climate Change Alliance, who I'll be volunteering with over the summer. And then by the end of the summer, I should have a greater grasp, what I'm going to write my dissertation on and what I hope to see as kind of my larger work and my larger ministry. So that's a very fluffy answer. No hardcore research this summer. Just getting to know a lot of people and my family's history is kind of the goal.
Well, Nate, I wish you Godspeed in the next few weeks with your interviews. I feel that um, it will be very powerful and meaningful for you to lean into your family's narrative with the joys and the pains across different generations and across the movement and migration. And I really want to check in with you to learn more from you, as I've already learned so much from you. So, Nate, thank you for sitting down for this podcast with me.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Talk soon.